TCU has a chance to make big waves on the recruiting trail by landing four-star prospect Bryce Gilmore.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. TCU, thank you for making this show, Locked On Horned Frogs, your first listen. TCU's in the middle of a pretty hot recruiting period for 2026, just coming off their big junior day, elite junior day, where they had a lot of their top 2026 prospects on campus, landed a couple commits, 3 pass rushers so far, 3 defensive ends, hybrid kind of outside linebacker types committed to the Frogs, and building in the trenches. That's what we've talked about really since Sonny Dykes took over. That's a huge key. On the defensive line, it seems like they're starting to see the momentum and the fruits of their labor there. O-line wise, they've done a really good job of loading up just on volume over the past couple of cycles. Going and getting high school prospects that you hope will work out. It's going to take some time. You got to get them in the weight room, strength and conditioning, get them reps in practice. But the hope is that one day they're going to turn into really good players. I like a lot of the guys they brought in. Killian Registry is a super interesting prospect from Keller in this 2024 class, right? Or 2025 class, excuse me. He's got NFL type measurables, and if he can figure out how to play the position at a super high level and get the strength and conditioning part of it, then there's a ton of upside there. Tobias Steps, similar story. Power 5, NFL type measurables. It's just about getting him right. Samir Camacho. There's a number of guys. Wesley Harvey, super intriguing prospect. But all these players that I mentioned, they're more 3-star, like high 3-star talents that you're hoping with the help of the coaching staff and development can become contributors. A prospect they have in the mix right now, though, Bryce Gilmore, 4-star offensive tackle out of Prosper High School, number 15 tackle in the nation, according to 247 Sports, 6'4", 270 pounds. He recently visited TCU, and he talked with Mike Roach about that. It's that time of year for these guys. They're getting a lot of these visits done, a lot of this recruiting done in the offseason because we're marching towards senior year of high school, want to make a decision, get that all sorted out before you go play. Here's what he said about TCU. TCU has always been there, Gilmore said. They stuck by my side the whole time, being there for me to ask questions. First thing when they came in, immediately took me to see Coach Sonny Dykes before everything else. Now, this past week, Bryce Gilmore has been very busy. He also went and visited Texas Tech and said positive things about Joe McGuire and that staff. And Herb Hand, which if you recognize that name, Herb Hand has been an offensive line coach forever. He was at Texas for a lengthy amount of time. He's at Florida State currently. Herb Hand came to Texas, did a home visit with Bryce. They're making him a priority. Bryce Gilmore is the type of blue chip prospect on the offensive line that even with TCU's recent commitment to building in the trenches, they haven't landed a guy like this. They haven't landed a dude who looks like he's ready to play right away. Now, typically, even with 4-star and 5-star offensive linemen, there's an amount of development and time that goes into it. But Bryce Gilmore, when you turn on the film and you watch this kid, he looks really promising. One thing that just jumped out to me immediately, I think it's Cole Kublik who says it, and he does work for the SEC network and is a sideline reporter for a lot of SEC games. He's got this catchphrase, pass pro is not passive, meaning pass protection by its nature, in a lot of cases, you're not really firing off the ball. You're kicking out, trying to get to the outside, trying to set a base, and you can get trapped in this cycle of catching the pass rusher. The pass rusher comes to you and brings the physicality, and you're sort of trying to hold on for dear life. Bryce Gilmore does a really good job of attacking pass rushers. Like when they're firing off the ball, he's coming at them, he's getting those arms locked in, and once he gets a hold of you, there's nowhere to go. He's also really good in the run game, both in what we would call influence blocking, which is essentially my running back's going over here to this, to the left side of the formation. I'm just trying to get my head across the shoulder of the defensive lineman hook him, turn him around so that he can't make a play. But also just your more typical, let me fire off the ball and just drive this dude out of the picture. You see that too. You see the strength. You see the physicality, that nasty streak you want. Not a ton of tape available where you see him pulling, but there's some of that. And he looks pretty fluid doing that. Times where he got out in the screen game and just looked like he knew what he was doing, looked the part, has some athleticism there. So moves well, has that frame that you want for an offensive tackle. This would be a huge get. Like, this is the type of prospect that TCU just hasn't been able to land consistently. And you can say stars aren't everything. Yes, I know there's some flaws with their recruiting systems and services, and it's not a perfect science. But the best teams in the country are pulling in the top prospects. And in a lot of cases, they're pulling in the top prospects on the O-line and D-line. And I've said multiple times on the show, that's what's been separating the SEC Big Ten from the Big 12. And, I mean, specifically the Big 12, if you want to narrow it down more, TCU when it compares to the blue bloods across the country. Bryce Gilmore looks like that type of player. He looks pretty polished. I mean, it doesn't technique-wise, it feels like he's got a lot of this down already. There's going to be plenty of room to grow and learn, but he doesn't look like a raw player who hasn't played a lot of football in his life. You get the feel that he knows what he's doing. Texas Tech, Florida State, there's a number of others that are coming after him. Auburn's offered, Cal, Duke, Florida. I mean, your typical blue chip type of player where everybody's making a push for him. But he's close by. And I know some of you might cringe a little bit when you hear the quote, like, TCU's just always been there for me, because there's a number of DFW prospects through the years that have sort of – they friendzone TCU, for lack of a better term, meaning they can go visit campus anytime they want. They're very comfortable with the coaching staff, and it's a place where they'll just kind of hang out from time to time. He mentioned they can ask questions. They can kind of get a feel for what's going on. They can come to a game if they want to. They can sort of do what they want and get TCU to do what they want, but then they end up committing somewhere else. They commit to Texas or Texas A&M or some, out-of-state SEC blue blood, some Big Ten school. Let's not make that the case here. Like, let's lock this down. Bryce Gilmore, it appears there's some interest. This feels like the type of – it's a good combination of he's a blue-chip player, but it's also the type of prospect you can get. It's not a can't-miss five-star that, unless there's some sort of personal connection that can't be broken, you don't have a shot. This is the type of player that you can land. I'm super excited that he's interested in TCU. And this upcoming season and moving forward, for this offense, if you're going to make it hum at a level that you want to see, real elite play, it starts and ends with the offensive line. Now, they did a good job towards the end of the season of pass blocking. They even did a nice job in some respects of run blocking, even though it was pretty much limited to that Savion Williams Wildcat package that we're not going to see replicated this next season unless they throw a curveball and bring somebody in that we're not expecting. But, the quarterbacks they have behind Josh Hoover are not dual threats. I don't see that type of athlete on the roster right now that has the combination of size and speed to take that over. So you have to get better up front. And this year they're banking on guys they have in-house, it appears. Both transfers that have been in the program now for a couple seasons, and then also young guys that they've been coaching up. And that's awesome. And the hope is that a few of those dudes hit and you can cobble together a really solid starting five. But from a high school recruiting standpoint, this would, in my mind, this would be a turning point. Like, this is the type of prospect that TCU just simply hasn't been able to land. There's mutual interest here. We're early in the 2026 process. Get it locked in. Like, go make it happen. get Bryce Gilmore committed. And yes, you're going to have to fend off suitors until signing day, but that's the punishment for getting top prospects committed. And if that's the trade-off you have to make, then I will gladly take it. Bryce Gilmore, 4-star offensive tackle, visited TCU, went to their junior day, has a good relationship with Coach Dykes, a name to watch moving forward through this recruiting cycle. When we come back, the SEC, it's dead. And that might be good news for TCU. We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Perfect time to join Prizepicks. NFC and AFC championship games coming up. It's the place that has real money sports action. Over 10 million members with billions in winnings. It's playoff time. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prizepicks. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Get ready to run your game this football season. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you pay your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prizepicks. Prizepicks, run your game. So I've been doing this podcast now for a little over 4 years. And one thing that I like to do every season when the national championship game wraps up is look at the teams. And of course, a few years ago, it was pretty easy to do that because TCU was in the game. But look at the teams that participated and think, okay, what do these teams have that TCU doesn't? What are the Frogs missing that Notre Dame and Ohio State brought to the table? Now, Ohio State won. Ended up being a one-possession ball game. They were in control of it for the majority of the ball game. Really cool moment for Ryan Day. I mean, what a bounce back. After losing that game against Michigan, I thought they were dead in the water. But they found a way to rebound. They got it done. And a really impressive performance against a good Notre Dame team. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind for me is we talked about the help in the trenches. But I think 2 defenses that have the potential to be dominant. Now, when they face good offenses like they did last night, then it's tougher. But for the majority of the season, the Notre Dame defense carried the day. And in a lot of ways, Ohio State could say the same thing. But in this particular matchup, I wanted to make this point. Is the SEC dead? And more importantly, are we finally starting to see a world where there is more parity in college football? And there's a better opportunity for a team like TCU to actually contend for a national title. And some of you might wonder, like, what are you talking about? Because it's not like Indiana won last night. It was Ohio State, right? So that we're still talking about a blue blood, a program that has done this before, that is constantly in the mix, that, I mean, they have 1 or 2 games a year in the regular season where the other team has equal footing from a talent perspective or has a talent advantage. But this is now 2 years in a row that the SEC has not been involved in this game. Washington, Michigan last year, Ohio State, and Notre Dame this season. And Notre Dame is one of those schools that, I mean, Brian Kelly left for LSU because he thought there was no way he could win a national title at Notre Dame. And I guess to this point, you could say that's still true. However, Notre Dame wasn't completely outclassed Monday night in my mind. Now, you might disagree, but I know that game was ugly at times. They ended up coming back and making a game of it, though. We saw Georgia go down this year. Carson Beck was hurt. I get that. Alabama, without Nick Saban, they're more vulnerable. Texas has lost 2 years in a row now in the semifinal game. And yes, one was to Ohio State the year before, that was to Washington, which is not your typical kind of blue blood program. As ugly as that was in the national title game a few years ago against Georgia, I am wondering if that Georgia team was maybe the last of what used to be the norm in college football, where you just had 1 or 2 teams that were head and shoulders better than everybody else. And the rest of the country couldn't keep up. And yeah, I know. Yes, Indiana, they got beat soundly, right? SMU, they got beat soundly. These kind of underdog teams that we wouldn't typically associate with playing big time games at the end of college football season, they didn't fare well. But it does feel like a shift is happening. And I hope the Big 12 and specifically TCU can capitalize on it. Arizona State should have beaten Texas. Now they didn't. And the bottom line is they didn't, right? At the end of the day, you had them 4th and 13. You couldn't get off the field. That's all that matters. But they were right there in that ball game. Cam Scadaboo was fantastic. Sam Leavitt was tough and looked really good. That defense settled in after a rough first couple of quarters of that ball game. I mean, they were right there. And BYU this year was a really good team. Nobody was pounding the table for them to get an opportunity in the playoff. Nobody thought they were snubbed. That's concerning for the Big 12. But maybe we're at a point now where the SEC reign, which has lasted for such a long time and has been ingrained in our minds, and some of it's propaganda. I mean, the ESPN has a vested interest in that league. Paul Feinbaum kind of acknowledged it. He did a podcast recently, and he was like, look, I'm at an SEC game every single week. So, yes, that does affect my opinion. I'm talking to these coaches. I'm talking to these players. I'm in these environments all the time. That's my world. So, of course, I think they're the best. And for a long time, he was right. But we always knew it was top heavy. It wasn't so much the SEC. It was more Alabama, Georgia, occasionally LSU. Auburn snuck in there a few times. But it was one or two programs that were carrying the banner for the entire league. And now that those teams seem more vulnerable, does it give the opportunity for somebody who's been on the outside looking in to make a move? The biggest question within the Big 12 since Texas and Oklahoma left, and we've discussed it before, who's going to fill that power vacuum, right? Who's going to step up and be – you're probably not going to see an OU type of run again, but can anyone do something similar? Could anyone be Texas, where you just use that recruiting advantage and stock up talent to a point where you're favored in most of these ball games? And everybody kind of has an argument for it. Nobody's done it yet, though. So is there a chance now with the transfer portal? That's changed a lot of the game. Like in the past, somebody goes down with an injury at Georgia and they just plug in, next 5-star player X who just walks in and athletically and physically can do similar things. And you don't see a huge drop off. Well, now that guy, if he's sitting for a year, he's probably transferring somewhere else. And so the depth and just the complete dominance that they've had for years, it's slipping a little bit. And there's still a big gap. But if it's closing, can this conference and this program be the ones that step in and say, hey, let's really go after some talent that can do this on a consistent basis and can go toe-to-toe with the best of the best? Because we saw what happened at SoFi Stadium when they played Georgia. I think it was closer than the score indicated. Those two teams were closer than the score indicated. But the bottom line was that's all anybody's ever going to remember. And so I desperately want TCU to get that chance again in a big moment, in a big game, where they can show what they can do. But they're going to need the dudes to do it. And I'm just wondering if we're finally at a place where that grip is being loosened a little bit on the top of the power structure in college football. Now, as I say that, I'm sure they're going to try to find a way to to get that grit back. But it does feel like things are moving in a different direction. When we come back, hoops tonight. Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. Therapy, it's important, man. It's something that took me years to get involved in, but once I did, I wondered, why did it take so long? Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep. You can communicate more effectively. Finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule, though, can be a challenge. That's where TALKSPACE comes in. TALKSPACE, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With TALKSPACE, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your need, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. TalkSpace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with TalkSpace when you go to TalkSpace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter the promo code SPACE80, and that's SPAC80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to TalkSpace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPAC80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's TalkSpace.com, and that promo code is SPAC80. Check it out today. Prioritize your mental health. It's never been easier than with TalkSpace. Staying on that topic of the SEC and the top teams in college football for a moment, Born Calm on YouTube says, with Jesse Ford and Carter Buck committing, hopefully TCU is committing to winning in the trenches. That's how you compete in college football or in the college football playoff. Look at the winner of the Big 12 this year, Arizona State. They went toe-to-toe with Texas because they could run the ball and pressure the quarterback. Yes, Jesse Ford, Carter Buck, two big-time pass rushers that recently committed to TCU for 2026. I mean, even looking back at that 2022 TCU team, they were good up front. Now, they didn't have a ton of depth, but those 5 offensive linemen, they were able to stay healthy, and they were fantastic as a unit. And then defensively, Dylan Horton became a big-time pass rusher. He wasn't necessarily projected to be that guy going into the season, but he really grew into that role, and it helped that defense immensely. And I think the staff is prioritizing that. They're trying to go get guys that can fit. It's now about continuing to land those players and then developing them and making them into contributors. That's going to be the huge challenge for the coaching staff moving forward on both the offensive and defensive lines. But you're totally right. If you're going to be at an elite team in football at any level, but particularly in college and the NFL, you have to be good on the O-line and D-line. You got to be good. You got to win the trenches. It's just imperative. And this is a league where you can really take advantage of that if you have elite players in those spots. 2 basketball games tonight. The men play at 6 against Kansas. The women play against Oklahoma State at 6:30 in Stillwater. Big time opportunity for the men. I hope they just go out there and play with house money. You could see in that Baylor game, they were very focused. They were very insistent on, hey, let's bounce back after a tough loss. And they came out and played with great energy and effort. Should be a good crowd tonight. Like, just give it your best shot and see what happens, right? This is a great KU team, as it always is. This could be a signature type of upset win that could really help boost your resume, because you're going to need a lot of wins in conference to make up for that non-conference schedule where you fell on your face a few times. You're banged up. You're young. Just go for it and play with abandon and hope that you can have a similar type of result. Even though I think this will be a much tougher matchup, just because I feel like Kansas will be so much better on the boards than Baylor was. And then the women going to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State. This is kind of in the middle of their gauntlet now, where they're going to play a lot of good teams, 4 or 5 games in a row. They're 7-0 in conference play. They're tied for the Big 12 lead with Kansas State right now, and we're about halfway through, the conference schedule. So, opportunity for Mark Campbell's squad to go on the road and get another big-time victory. I saw in the latest bracketology they were a 2 seed, I believe, on ESPN, which would be outstanding. You can't say enough about the turnaround that's happened, going from searching for players a year ago to being in some big-time games and not just making the tournament, but really at this point starting to talk about playing for a top 4 seed moving forward. So that'll be fun to watch. We'll have plenty of coverage of those games on tomorrow's show, as well as football also. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel.